Okay, so thank you again, everyone, for being here today. As I think you all know, the topic is dana, or generosity. And I chose this topic actually partly based on a memory that I had a few years ago when I sat my first 3-month retreat at IMS in Massachusetts. And I flew to the UK to see my sister in London. And it was just a week or two before Christmas. And I remember being on the tube in an absolutely packed carriage, looking around the tube, and everyone looked so stressed. There was just this energy of worry, anxiety. People were shouting into their mobile phones about the presents that they had bought or hadn't bought, and it was crowded and packed. And I had just come from this 3-month retreat, so I was in a completely different space. And I looked at everyone and I thought, oh, this is painful. This is so sad. This is, in theory, meant to be a time of peace and connection and generosity, and everyone's tying themselves in knots trying to achieve that. So in New Zealand, Aotearoa, it's a little bit similar, but it's summer for us. So there's this big push to get all our work done so we can then go and take some time away at the beach or away from the city. So it felt like generosity might be a useful theme to explore at this time of year. And it is, in fact, the foundation of this whole path of practice. It's this path that leads to ever deepening freedom of heart and mind. And maybe partly because it is the foundation of this path, there can be assumption, oh, that's for beginners. It can be taken for granted, it can be overlooked, maybe even dismissed as something lightweight or fluffy. So that's one common attitude. At the same time, for some people, it can bring up discomfort and unease, which might be why this isn't a huge gathering here today. Because there can be a sense of, oh, I should be more generous. I'm supposed to be more generous. I need to be more generous. And then we kind of shut down and pull away. So I want to start by thanking you for actually making the effort to be here. That itself is a form of generosity. So I'm not sure, you all are from different parts of the world, Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, maybe elsewhere. But in many of the places that I teach these days, dana has become more or less equated with just making a monetary donation at the end of a Dharma talk or a workshop or a retreat. And in Western Insight circles, at least, that's usually where people hear about dana. It's the invitation to give a donation to the teachers and or the host organization in exchange for having received the teachings. Now, if that's all that people hear about dana, that's unfortunate for a few reasons. One is that it collapses the depth and the breadth of what practicing generosity can be about and makes it into just another financial transaction in a sea of requests for money. And probably especially at this time of year, my inbox is overflowing with requests for donations. The other issue is it can, as I said earlier, easily stir up unconscious or semi-conscious feelings of unease, linking to feeling obligated to give, maybe resistant to giving, or it can activate anxiety about our financial circumstances. So it can trigger a sense of insufficiency or lack, which is the very opposite of the generosity that we're trying to develop. The other issue is, I was thinking, why don't we talk about dana more broadly? And I realized it can seem like a giant conflict of interest. I do live fully supported by dana. And so if I talk about it in more depth, it could seem manipulative, like I'm trying to boost donations by preaching about the gospel of generosity, like I'm some kind of evangelist preacher or something, televangelist. So to try and take it out of that realm, I decided that if you do choose to offer any dana, I'll forward it to the Buddhist Global Relief. Some of you might know Bhikkhu Bodhi's organization that he set up. It supports food assistance and education and women's empowerment, sustainable agriculture, all those kind of good things. Okay, so that's the first thing to acknowledge, that as the Dharma has come to the West, of course, the practice of dana is influenced by our existing cultural values and systems such as capitalism and the Judeo-Christian ethos that still informs many aspects of Western society. So I found it interesting to discover that in the Buddhist teachings, according to one of my teachers, Gil Fronsdal, there are two words to describe what we usually think of as generosity. So the word dana strictly means gift. In other words, it's the thing that's being given, whether that's money or material goods, maybe less tangible gifts, such as giving our time, giving energy, attention, listening, presence, kindness, care. Those are all aspects of generosity. And in mainstream society, we usually value an act of generosity based on the value of whatever the gift is. So conventionally, someone who gives a big, lavish gift is seen as being more generous than someone who gives something that's of insignificant monetary value. But as you probably know, in the Buddha's understanding, the true value of a gift comes from the quality of the heart, the motivation that's underlying the act of generosity. And the Buddha used a different word for this, the word chaga. So chaga is written C-A-G-A, but the letter C in Pali is pronounced as cha. So chaga refers to the mental quality of openness. It's the spirit of being willing to share. It's the quality that motivates us to make the gift. So we can think of chaga as being the spirit of generosity, and then dana as the thing being given, the gift itself. So chaga is the feeling, the motivation, the desire to share something with someone, and to be of benefit to others, and to we ourselves. I'll say more about that soon. So chaga is a quality of open-heartedness, open-mindedness, attunement. And because of that, when we're motivated by chaga instead of self-interest, the benefit is that it becomes easier to access all kinds of other skillful mental qualities too. You may have noticed that when you're feeling generous, almost automatically qualities like the 4 brahmavihāra come in. So kindness, compassion, gladness, equanimity, acceptance, balance, steadiness, interest, calm. Generosity has a way of bringing in these other beautiful qualities. But in mainstream society, we're so often focused on the gift itself, and worse, the material or the financial value of that gift. And so we often overlook what's actually the most important aspect of the giving, the quality of this heart that we're doing it with. So just to explore that a bit further, I'd like to share an experience from my own life when I was living in the US and I was volunteering in a prison near the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. So every Sunday, a couple of friends and I would go in and lead a meditation group, and we did Dharma study for quite a few years. And we developed a core sangha of men who started coming every week. And sometimes they'd bring a friend with them just to check us out. And on one particular Sunday, one of these friends came along and he said, "I'm a Christian, but I just came to see what you all do and to support my friend because I see it's been really good for him to be here." So just that I thought was pretty generous of him because it was a Sunday and he was missing going to his own Christian service so he could be in our group with his friend. Then at the end of the session, he came up to me and he said, "Why don't you have a Buddha figure here?" And I explained to him, yes, the clerk of the group had applied to get one, but in that system, those kind of processes take a really long time. It had been, 18 months and still nothing had happened. And this man said, that's too bad. We have a crucifix in our group. You should be able to have a Buddha statue. So I didn't think much more about that conversation, but a few months later, the same guy showed up, and this time he was carrying a package. And he said, I've got something for you. And when he unwrapped the package, it was a statue of a Buddha seated in meditation. And it looked like it had been carved out of wood, teak or something. I couldn't believe it. Like, where would he get something like that? And then he told me that he'd made it himself. And I was surprised, like, where would you get wood? And he explained, well, it's actually paper mache. And the paper for the paper mache had come from toilet paper that he and a whole bunch of other men had donated. And this was quite a big deal because in the prison I understood that the men only get one roll of toilet paper a week, and after that they have to pay for it. So toilet paper was actually kind of precious. And I was amazed that people would donate toilet paper to this man. And then he put his time and energy in breaking it down into fibers, and he mixed it with soap. And soap was also rationed. So more generosity there. He made a paste, and he molded it into this Buddha figure, and then he colored it with a mixture of brown shoe polish and instant coffee to make it look like teak. So the dollar value of that gift of toilet paper and soap, almost nothing. But the value to me and my IMS friends and to the men in the group was huge because of the quality of heart, the generosity that went into it. So hopefully you can get a sense from that example of why the Buddha made Chaga and Dana the foundation of his teachings. So according to the discourses, whenever he was meeting with new people, he didn't immediately launch into meditation instructions. He didn't talk about deep insight into impermanence and unsatisfactoriness and not self. Instead, he started by talking about the value of cultivating generosity. And only when he felt people had some understanding of that did he go on to bring in the rest of the path to freedom. Now these days, as I alluded to at the beginning of the talk, generosity is often seen as ordinary, maybe even mundane, and often people coming into this practice want to jump over it and get to the juicier stuff. But actually, I wonder if the apparent ordinariness of generosity is one of the reasons the Buddha started teaching there. Because pretty much every culture, every society understands and appreciates generosity. It's almost universally valued. And again, thinking in terms of Chaga, as I mentioned earlier, cultivating that capacity naturally makes us more open-hearted. It makes us more open-minded, more connected, more receptive to the rest of the teachings. And it gives us very immediate experience of the benefits of this path. Because when we are able to experience and access that natural willingness to share, it feels good. We enjoy it, and it sets up a positive feedback loop that makes us want to continue with the practice. So just to see if you can get a direct sense of that, I'd like to take a moment now just to see if you can remember a time when either you were generous to someone else or someone was generous to you. And this doesn't have to be a huge thing. It could be something as simple as just arriving into this Zoom room tonight and smiling at a friend, or maybe smiling at someone you didn't know. So just take a moment in silence now. Can you bring to mind an experience of offering or receiving generosity? And what's that like? What do you notice in the body, the heart, the mind, when you sense into this experience of generosity? So thank you. Now that we've touched into some of the immediate benefits of this spirit of generosity, this jaga, I also feel like it's important to acknowledge what can get in the way, some of the challenges to feeling generous that I think many of us have to navigate, things that tend to keep us stuck in our own small world. There's a lot of societal pressure that keeps us disconnected from others and disconnected from our own inner resources. So, it's possible some of you here might be feeling a bit, this isn't working, or I can't find it, or what's wrong with me. If that happens to be in the terrain, I really encourage you not to get caught in self-judgment. Try to stay curious, because right there in those reactions is actually where generosity becomes a wisdom practice, an insight practice. If we're willing to pay attention and turn towards the discomfort, that can help us to show us the places where we might be stuck or shut down, where we might be getting caught in old patterns and habits of heart and mind. And yes, it might be uncomfortable to see those stuck places, but unless we see them, we can't do anything to help them release. So I briefly mentioned at the start of this talk how for some people, even the idea of cultivating generosity can activate all kinds of painful emotions and beliefs around unworthiness, maybe inadequacy, insufficiency, anxiety, there's not enough to go around, maybe fear of not giving enough or not doing it right. And all of that tends to center around a small, contracted sense of me is lacking in some way. So again, if you recognize this, it's the way to overcome these afflictive states, to heal them, so we can live from a sense of abundance rather than lack. And usually, if we look more closely at the ways we tend to resist being more generous, often they're based on a misunderstanding of what this practice is about. So I want to explore some of the common misunderstandings in relation to generosity now, because there are a few significant ways that the Buddha's approach to generosity is different from how we think of it in mainstream societies, again, informed by Judeo-Christianity and, of course, capitalism. So this willingness to explore some of our deeper conditioning is what elevates generosity from being just a nice quality we can appreciate to actually being a support for insight, for understanding, for wisdom. And for all of that to happen, we need to bring more refined awareness to where and how and why and when we are or aren't generous. So in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha is reported to have said, before giving, glad. While giving, the mind is bright and clear. Having given, one is gratified. This is the consummation of the sacrifice. So before, during, and after, we're invited to pay attention rather than just sort of casually giving someone something. Think about it beforehand. Can you find a sense of gladness for what you're about to do, instead of perhaps feeling obliged or expected to give? When we do bring this mindfulness, awareness to our motivations, we usually find that there's a mix of them, some that might not be so skillful. And we've probably also been on the receiving end of that too. Have you ever been given something by someone that's sort of just half-hearted, almost tossed in your direction? Maybe there's a tinge of irritation or resentment with it. And we know it's uncomfortable to receive that kind of fake generosity. On the other hand, you've probably also had the experience, maybe some people in your life for whom generosity just flows naturally. Some of you described that just now. And there's a genuine delight in being able to share time and energy and resources. So with that sutta quote, we're invited to really notice what's the beginning motivation, how does it feel during the giving, what's the effect, can we feel gratified at having given? Now, all of that, I think, is pretty foreign to how we normally give. Most of us are much more familiar and more comfortable with the transactional nature of capitalism, where there's just a stated amount or a stated value, and we pay whatever it is in pounds or dollars or time, end of story. We don't have to think about it any further. We don't have to consider the value of what we've received or what we're offering in response. We just pay and go as quickly as possible. We have PayWave and all these other systems that make our transactions super fast, and I would say also super mindless. Just get it over and done with. And I've shared with some of you before when I first started living on Dharma, and I would meet with individual students. There was one particular time where I had a meeting, practice meeting, to talk about someone's meditation. And at the end, they said, okay, how much do I owe you? And back then they still had checkbooks, so I pulled out his checkbook. And I said, well, that's not really how Dharma works. It's up to you. Yeah, he says, I've got money, you've got bills to pay, just give me an amount. And again, I said, well, that's not really the spirit, just invitation. And it was quite an awkward interaction. And he kept pushing me to give him an amount. And part of me was tempted just to say, okay, X, just to end the discomfort of the conversation. But I stayed with it. And afterwards I realized actually that was useful. It pushed both of us to bring more awareness to the whole process and to have more of a discussion and more of a relationship than if I just said, okay, I charge X dollars for my time. So if Dharma is making you uncomfortable, that's okay. It's really an invitation to sense in, to take time. And there's one further significant difference between mainstream values in relation to generosity and what the Buddha is encouraging. As you know, in the Buddhist approach, we're encouraged to dissolve distinctions between self and other. And actually, our own well-being is just as important as anyone else's. So the Buddha was really clear. If we are giving in a way that's undermining our own well-being, that is not seen as healthy. And this is pretty different from the Christian tradition, where we're exhorted to, quote, give until it hurts. That's a quote from Mother Teresa. But in contrast to Christianity, the Buddha didn't actually value poverty. He understood the pain, the distress, the stress of not being able to take care of our basic needs. So he really emphasized that giving should be proportional to our means, that we need to consider our own means as well as the other person. So in the Jataka collection, he's reported to have said, if you have a little, give a little. If you have a medium amount, give a medium amount. If you have much, give much. So hopefully it's reassuring that practicing generosity is not about naively giving away everything that's of value to you and going without due to some kind of misguided self-abnegation. It's about maintaining our own resources as best we can and then being generous within our means. And every one of us, every human alive, is operating within limits. While it's true that our resources are limited, we don't have to feel limited by those limits. We can make a choice to expand our comfort zones. We just don't have an infinite supply of money and material goods and time and energy to share. And at the same time, we're faced with infinite need. And so sometimes the mismatch between our own limited resources and the overwhelming demands out there, sometimes that leads to a feeling of overwhelm or even paralysis, or the tendency to hoard, holding on to what we do have, out of fear of not being able to take care of ourselves. So generosity challenges us to notice if there is a sense of lack. And the Buddha recognized that getting caught in this can become self-reinforcing, self-fulfilling. Even back in the Buddha's day, before capitalism became so dominant, he recognized how fear closes the heart and mind, and how it tends to reinforce the poverty mentality that actually can become self-fulfilling. So in the Sutta Nipata, he's reported to have said, what the miser fears that keeps him from giving is the very danger that comes when he doesn't give. So I'll read that again. What the miser fears that keeps him from giving is the very danger that comes when he doesn't give. In other words, the more we close off to others, the more trapped we become in our own small world. And then others stop giving to us because they know it's not going to be reciprocated or maybe even appreciated. So this is a delicate balance, because ideally we want to practice generosity without the bias of expecting anything in return. But cultivating chaga is a gradual training, just like every other aspect of the Buddha's teachings. And to begin with, maybe we do find ourselves giving in this more transactional way, being generous in order to get something back. That's okay. You could say it's an act of generosity to yourself to accept that at least at first your motives are not always going to be 100% pure. But in spite of that, some good usually comes from giving. One of my first teachers used to say, don't wait until your motivations are perfect before being generous, because you might be waiting a long time. And in the meantime, you'll miss a lot of opportunities to strengthen chaga and to benefit others. So I'd like to acknowledge here another maybe significant cultural difference between how generosity is practiced in dominant Western cultures and maybe more how it was at the time of the Buddha or in Asian cultures. And some of you mentioned that in your sharing just now. Often, when we're generous, the person receiving it is almost embarrassed. And this shows up in so many different ways. I don't know if you've had the experience of maybe going to a friend's place for dinner and you bring some flowers or some food, and often the conventional response is, oh, you shouldn't have. Or if someone thanks you for a gift, it's common to say, oh, it's nothing. Or as I say in Spanish, de nada, it's nothing. And many of us have a cultural cringe around being seen to be generous, so rooted in a false sense of humility. But actually, from the Buddha's perspective, being able to receive generosity, even to celebrate it, is a much healthier attitude, because it encourages the spirit of generosity to flow rather than be stifled by awkwardness. So I first realized how different Western cultures relate to giving compared to many Asian cultures when I started managing a retreat center in Australia. And several of you here know that center, know that it was supported by immigrants from Myanmar. So that center taught meditation in the Burmese Mahasi method. And when I first arrived there, I didn't really know anything about any of this, but I started to notice that in the kitchen, almost every item I picked up had a handmade label sellotaped to it, stating who had donated it. So I'd pick up a thermos flask or a serving tray, and there would be a note on the bottom, donated by the Mint family, or donated by the Pion family, or donated by the Mong family. And at first I found this a little strange. But then I started to realize that this generosity flowed out everywhere. And the early supporters of that center got together to build a stupa. So a stupa is one of those domes that traditionally houses relics and other items of value, and people practice walking meditation around it as a devotional practice. And so the center had a big stupa. And on a plaque on the wall nearby, there was a list of every single person who had donated to this stupa building project. And my first response, reading that list, it was in numerical order, was, wow, this person gave $500. That's quite a lot. And then I kept reading the list, and at the bottom, this person gave $4. How embarrassing. That was my first thought. That was my conditioning, to only see the financial value of what was given, instead of appreciating how every single person's contribution was acknowledged and honored and celebrated. And many of those people were refugees. So quite a few years ago, $4 was a significant amount of money in that person's life. So for me too, this has been a huge source of learning. So when I first started living completely on dana 13 years ago, in the beginning, I'd sometimes notice this kind of inner cringe or embarrassment or a sense of unworthiness when somebody gave me something. But eventually I realized that to meet someone's gift in that way was really doing both of us a disservice. It wasn't honoring their generosity, and it wasn't letting me make the most of that opportunity to receive it and to express my gratitude. So I've had to really change my orientation to receiving generosity, and as best I can, take it in with an open heart and open mind. And when I am able to do this, it feels like there's a sense of flow. There's a mutuality. There's gratitude naturally comes. So in conclusion, this main purpose of practicing generosity is to cultivate an open heart and open mind. And that helps to develop and strengthen the kind of relationships that support us to follow this path of freedom together. And dana and chaga are the starting points of that whole process, because they're woven through this whole journey. And if we pay attention, we see every step along the way is supported by this heart quality of offering and receiving. And in the end, the path finishes with generosity too. The dana of sharing these teachings with others and of being of service in whatever ways we can.